Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do on officehours.global. Our first hour is always a general discussion of production, IT-related topics, stuff like that, where we answer audience-submitted questions. The second hour, typically, we do a deeper dive into a topic. Today, crafting content for training. It's a look at one of the most common and most profitable ways you can use your video skills that you've been working on by watching the show and doing other things to make a living, or at least make some side money or whatever. We'll talk about what goes into training content, some tips about how to do it correctly. All that said, let's dive into our questions for today. Mitch, what do we got?
Thank you, Bill. John Foltz from Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania, has the first one. What's the easiest way to get audio from an iPad onto a Dante network?
And we're going to start with John Wallace. John?
Probably using the Avio Bluetooth adapter. Would be one of the easiest ways to handle that. You can also use one of their USB-C to XLR adapters and also tap into that way. Make sure that the apps that you're using are supporting third-party audio devices or Bluetooth if you're trying to bring something in. But if you're going into like a Zoom meeting or anything, definitely the Bluetooth adapter would be a really easy way to get audio in and out.
Nigel?
Yes, ditto on the Bluetooth adapter. That's the easiest way, but you can also get devices by, I think it's Clark Connect, that allow you to go 3.5 mil to Dante, and we'll do that conversion as well.
Mitchell Hill.
Yeah, I think the Bluetooth would certainly work. I think a better audio quality one would be to use the USB Avio adapter, just as a USB and an not an XLR. It's got a Ethernet on the other side.
And next question.
Next question from Douglas Carmichael. I enjoyed watching conversations with Tony Mobley behind the scenes in an after-hours breakout room. Could we do the same for office hours?
I think I've heard some things about that guy. Do you know more?
Yeah, a while back we asked Alex if we could do this. It never took off. There is for office hours every morning a behind-the-scenes webinar, which is a bunch of the folks on the back end. And sometimes depending on who can share their screen, you'll see the universe back end, and you have to sign up in the training via a Google Doc to get access to the comms. I wanted to see a separate feed, which would kick out the comms embedded with the interface, though you could choose which you wanted to see, the multi-view or the interface or both, depending on the size of your screen, or if it was done in Zoom or if it was done in YouTube. So I guess we could just push on Alex a little bit more to make that happen, but it does take money because it's hardware that you'll have to use or a cloud instance to really make it happen and somebody to run it all. And there's already a lot of crew behind the scenes, making this stuff happen. But I'm a big proponent just because the way that this training is going on, I mean, it's so valuable. I mean, it's super, super valuable, and we're not letting everybody see behind the scenes, and it's cool stuff to hear because it's every day. Where else on the internet do you get to see behind the scenes of a real show that's, getting cut live? There's nowhere. So I hope that we can do it.
Absolutely. It would be fun. One of the most interesting things I've ever watched, there's on YouTube, Hamish Hamilton and his crew calling the Super Bowl show. So you get to hear the comms for something that big and complex. You get to listen to the show caller as she's going through every single cue, and you get to watch in real time the show as it is switched based on her calls. It's really fascinating to watch that behind the scenes. And I hope that they work it out because it is, as Guy said, it's fascinating to watch that. Let's go on to the next question.
Paul Buchan from Columbus, Ohio. And Paul asks, looking for a good kit to travel with for Zoom calls without breaking the bank. I'm hoping for less than $1,000. Insta360, pan tilt zoom, Rode NT, and a ring light. Any suggestions from the panel?
Let's have Courtney start out here. Courtney?
I think you got a good start there with the Insta360 Link and the Rode NT. Those are definitely good choices for camera and sound. I would not use the ring light, though. I kind of have a thing about ring lights. Ring lights were invented actually for medical photography to create shadowless images, and a lot of photographers use them on women because they're flattering, because if you put the lens in the center of the ring light, it eliminates all shadows, so wrinkles don't show up. So that's their main use, but it makes a very flat, pasty face. And I prefer something like this, which would be the newer advanced, and they make this one in a 12-inch. It comes with a carrying case. It's bicolor. And the problem with a ring light is when you have glasses or you have something that reflects behind you, you see the ring light and you look like a raccoon a lot of times with glasses when you see these circles in their eyes. The newer is a big flat panel, and it looks just like a window reflected in your glasses if you do have glasses on, or if something in the background, a picture frame or something, is reflecting the light back into the lens. It just looks like a big panel, and this one in particular has a built-in battery, so it's portable, comes as carrying case, it's bicolor. You can tune it between daylight and tungsten, so if you're shooting in a room with a lot of daylight flooding in, you can tune it to daylight. And if you're shooting at night, you can tune it to tungsten, and it's adjustable 0 to 100% dimmable, and for about $55 on Amazon.
John Wallace.
Yeah, I'd be careful with the Rode NT. Just, you don't know what kind of room you're stepping into. So if you can, like a Shure MV7 type mic may do you better if you can get closer to your source. And then look at the PavoTube 6Cs. Those are great lights to have. Very portable. They have battery power. You can set them up. They have magnet mounts, so you can even do that if you like. Definitely an option for you, but yeah, stay away from the ring light if you can.
Yeah, and the only other note I'd make, Alex has mentioned a lot because he's really enjoys the Insta360, but he did say it's a bit on the fragile side, so you may want to find a small case for that by itself, so you have a case within a case kind of circumstance. Guy, you had a thought?
I just got to come out and defend the ring light a little bit. It's not the best for travel, but I mean, I've literally sold tens of thousands of ring lights. I'm the one who brought that thing back to the market. I mean, some of you probably don't know the history, but if you Google it, go read the article in The Atlantic. So I met up with a beauty blogger that has millions of subscribers, and basically we got those things out in the market. So I own the domain name divaringlight.com, and we really got those things out there. But anyways, the ring light, when used dead on, like Courtney said, will have those artifacts, but a lot of people that are starting to use them professionally will start to angle them and use them offset, so that way you can get that other more of a high key light, like what you're seeing now with just the single point in my eyes. The other thing with the newer technology of lights, the foldable mats are probably something that I'd be taking a look at for on the go. If you're traveling, it just depends on how light you want to roll. And then for mics, I do like the little Rode shotgun mic. This is the Rode NTG. So it's USB, and then it's got headphone out on the back. This one sounds really good for the money. That's probably the one that I'd take a look at. And then the Insta360 Link is a great camera that we figured out with the half-inch chip for $299. That's probably the best bang for buck.
And I'm going to support what Guy said in terms of the ring light, because that's what I use in the sound booth, because I have a limited amount of time. I needed a soft light, and I didn't have the ability to go back and move things around. I'm literally in a box. And so in those kind of circumstances, it can work great. Let's go on to the next question.
From Jens Olson in Sandpoint, Idaho. Jens asked, what is affordable Skycam rig to suspend between two large trees 300 feet apart?
Mitchell.
Well, the original Skycam, the one I'm thinking of, one that was invented by Garrett Brown, is a 4-point system because it has to be able to pull it at any point on an axis. So I'm not sure if you can get it to work on a 2-point, or if there's any knockoffs by now that exist that can do that. So I'm sorry, I don't have the exact answer you're looking for.
If you want to move a camera around on a rig like that, it's going to be a little problematic. You know, I don't know if you've ever tried to run 300 feet, even of rope or anything. Just the distance involved between those two things is so far that unless you do some kind of really strong cable and a winching system to make it really taut, you're going to have a big dip in it. I mean, 300 feet is a long distance to cover. They have all those things at the NFL with their level of budgets. And as Mitchell was saying, they have 4 points and can move that camera infinitely on the XY axis overhead. But hard to get that done in an open space of 300 feet. This may be a circumstance where drones are going to be a lot easier for you to deal with, and they're so much more affordable now that may be a possibility you want to look into. Courtney, do you have a thought about that?
Well, Skycams are a lot more complex than a lot of people realize because those winches are digitally controlled, and they control them not only in the X-Y axis, but in the Z axis as well, because the slackness of the cable determines the height. And so those winches have to operate in accordance with each other and perfectly synchronized together. So that means you've got to run control cables to every end where the winch is all around the stadium if you have 3 points. So that the controller then controls those servo motors that drive those winches to control the height and XY position of the camera. And then, of course, you have the problem of getting power and or video to the camera. You can run them on batteries these days and with transmitters to get rid of that. But dealing with that cable, if it's cabled, if you don't have transmitters and batteries, you got to remember to change the batteries and deal with the transmitter. But it's not a trivial setup for Skycam.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to the next question.
From David Paskin in Miami, Florida, and right here on our panel. After listening yesterday, I ordered a sound dampening blanket. Assuming walls on all sides are roughly the same, where is the most important place to place the blanket?
John Wallace will start us off.
I would make sure you're understanding where your early reflections are happening, and you want to start dampening those first to get rid of those first reflections. That's going to really clean up the sound that's around you. I don't know what the shape of your room is, but understanding where high reflections are going to happen. If you can also get like base blockers or milk crates work really well to kind of put in different areas so you're trapping the low end energy as well, and that energy is not traveling back to your microphone.
Courtney?
Yeah, a lot of what John Wallace said, and the thing that causes a problem with room noise is parallel walls, which generate what's called a standing wave, where the sound hits one wall that's parallel to another wall, and the sound bounces back and forth between those walls and creating a long decay period. So even if you only have one sound blanket, put it on one of the parallel walls. And if you have two sets of parallel walls, like a box, put it on two parallel walls. So you can put them on adjacent ones, and they can be the ones that are out of frame. But as long as you're blocking any one of the two parallel walls, you should help to reduce the standing waves in the room and reduce your echo considerably. And like John said, the earliest why am I doing that in program? The earliest, I was stuck in a loop, I guess. The earliest reflection is the place to stop the sound from bouncing around.
We just thought it was more Courtney, which is cool. Mitchell.
I thought John and Courtney had it covered, except perhaps the ceiling. It might be an issue with sound going up and down from the floor to the ceiling.
And Guy Cochran.
Yeah, the blankets are nice for on the go if you're bouncing around place to place. We used to put these in our one-button studio as well, but looking back at the early ones that we did the install on, it looks kind of, pardon my term, but ghetto. If you want to put that in your studio and leave it up, I would recommend taking a look at the London Room or Prime Acoustics or one of these other brands that have the actual panels, like these ones you see behind me. They do trap a lot more of the low or mid frequencies as well, because there's there's rock wool or fiberglass inside of there that catches a lot more of those frequencies. The blanket's just going to take away more of the highs. So something to consider.
John Wallace.
And that if you're doing anything with rock wool, and you can make your own, there's ways to do it online. You can find DIY kits. Make sure you're doing at least 4 inches thick.
And David Paskin's back in.
So here's the problem with this group. I have one curtain to hang, and I just wanted to know what wall. And now I have to go out and I have to buy new panels, and I have to get milk crates and.
Wait, you forgot the auto poles to hang the curtain, right, like I did over there, which is, yeah, so that's another thing you've got.
Oh, Guy's just going to hand it to me. Thank you.
I'm just going to hand it to you here through the prompter. I'll just give it right to you.
So we're mindful of the fact that, yes, David, you have a problem you have to solve. And hopefully all the rest of this discussion is good for the other people who are watching who may have different problems and can learn from all of this wisdom. But yeah, flat parallel wall, that's the answer to your specific one. We could have done in this sentence. John Wallace, you have another thought before we move on?
Yeah, just real quick. It's now the planning that will go into the next step of your purchase.
Very true.
Really just one thing at a time.
Yeah. Next question.
Lucas Herzog from Mainz. Are there external SSDs you would recommend for use with M1 Mac Minis? Use case audio and video editing.
Guy Cochran.
I've been saving this one for a while. So, David, to your point, we're really expensive friends sometimes. So here's just the ultimate over-the-top answer. Are you ready? This one. Okay.
Whoa.
8 Thunderbolt ports, 12 SSDs inside of this bad boy. 12. Get a load of that. 12 SSDs, 5,000 megabits per second transfer time. You can daisy chain 6 of these to get 576 terabytes. They are called the Iodine. So take a look at those. I'll put a link in the chat. And there's some good articles about ranking and the benchmarks and all that. But
wait a second. You haven't fully scared us. Do you have a number? Do we know what?
$7,500 for a 12 terabyte.
Whoa.
And then if you want
get
the
5 of them.
You want the 24 terabyte, starts at 12 terabytes for 3,950. 24 terabytes is $7,500. There you go.
Okay. So order your half dozen of those and have fun. Nigel, you had a thought.
Sort of at the other end of the scale is this little SanDisk, which come in half gigabyte, 1 gigabyte and 2 gigabytes. And I quite like those, but I feel like I'm underachieving.
Well, that's good. It's always good to provide a range for everybody here on Office Hours. So hopefully that gave you some of the things you want to do. I hope we completely answered your question because we had so much fun with that. And I will say that audio and video editing systems, particularly the computers that we tend to use, are so much better than they used to be. And SSDs have gotten so much faster than they used to be that unless you're doing something really exotic, surprisingly, the normal build systems on most of the laptops and things like that coming out of the solid manufacturers are pretty capable of handling regular SD and HD video. When you get into exotic things, like if you're doing a whole bunch of complex compositing and things like that, having more oomph is always a good thing. John Preto has some thoughts too, and so does Courtney. John?
I call it the toaster. I have a USB SSD reader. It reads any SATA drives, and so on the back of my Blackmagic, it's got an SSD reader. So I just slide in the SSD drive and then I take it out and I move it over to my toaster and plug it in. Works fabulously.
Okay, Courtney.
I just wanted to correct what Nigel said because this happens to me all the time. He said 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabyte, and 4 gigabytes, terabytes, not gigabytes. That'd be a very small hard drive.
Well, you can probably get a 500 gig SSD.
500
still,
gig is, yeah, you can get 500 gigs, but not 1 gig.
For your keychain, maybe.
Yeah.
That's not going to do a lot of video editing for you. Anyway, let's go ahead and, Courtney, did you get in the last part of that? Or did you? No, you just did that. Sorry. Let's move on to the next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada. Mac OS has, for a long time, network location presets and system preferences network, where you can easily change from one network profile to another. Is there any comparable fast way to set up and switch network profiles in Windows?
Not sure if we have anyone here today who was network aware on the Windows side. I'm looking through the panel and I don't see any of the faces that we would typically have here. John Wallace. John, that's right. You would work in that space a good little bit. What do you think?
I'm not sure what you do with this location changes, but you can definitely just script it out quickly with PowerShell. Any sort of network profile changes that you would want to make, if it's DNS or static IP address or anything like that. I'm not sure what the use case of network locations are in OS X, so I can't speak to it specifically, but PowerShell will be able to get you there with a quick script.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the next question.
From Colin Mulcahy in Dublin, Ireland. In a bind, need a master video podcast audio in DaVinci. Myself. Besides Levels, EQ, and Dynamics, are there any third-party plugins that can help me? Any good video sources on mastering audio in DaVinci Resolve for Vimeo and podcast audio distribution?
Well, you've certainly got all the tools you would need. So you're looking for expertise, not tools. I mean, Resolve has the entire Fairlight system built into it, and I think you have every tool you need. This is a matter of, you've got the spice rack. Now the question is techniques in cooking and deciding how much of this and how much of that do you want to add or take away so that you're not building something that just doesn't taste good. And unfortunately, that's hard to do unless somebody's actually able to go through and listen to the recording and say, what does it need? It's really hard to get third-party stuff. I mean, some people, and also the kind of target you're looking for. Are you looking, when this goes out to the audience, for something that is super clear and easy to hear? If so, a little bit of compression and things like that can really help, particularly spoken word stuff, break through. But this is so subjective and so much a process of taste that I am loath to give you any kind of a formula as to how it works. Because, I could say that, what I just said, a little compression. And the next thing you know, somebody adds, a 10-to-1 compression ratio, and the whole thing sounds like totally overdone. And it's hard to listen to over time because you've added too much of what is otherwise a good thing. So I'm not sure we can really help you more than that. Good luck with the project. Courtney, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, if you don't have it, you might look at purchasing the Fairlight audio interface for DaVinci Resolve, which is about $2,300 here. And it gives you an analog interface to do your mastering with. So that might be a good purchase for you if you're going to be using a lot of DaVinci Resolve for mastering audio especially.
Yeah, when I've read up about mastering, because I don't do much of it myself, I master all the things that go out of here, but typically I'm doing for broadcast, and I kind of know that world pretty well. But most of what mastering is making sure that all the elements in a recording have their individual sonic space, so that it's typically used with music production and things like that, so that if you have a singer with a low range and you got the bass, you don't want to mess those up a little bit, so that those two things become, you kind of keep them as distinct elements so they both can be heard and don't interfere with each other. It's placing the audio frequencies and elements and everything else in the proper place and getting them all to the proper levels before it's sent out to the consumer. But that's as much as I know about that. So let's move on to the next thing.
Cindy Drozda from Erie, Colorado. Cindy asks, Santa Bart showed his Black Magic Ultimat in After Hours. Can this be used with vMix? If so, how would it be hooked up?
And Guy Cochran.
So we're undergoing the same type of thing with on the Mac side with Memo Live. And so we took an Ultimat for our one-button studio, and we're redesigning using Memo Live's keyer, because the software keyer is based on older technology. I think it's Quartz or something like that Apple made. So the key just wasn't everything that I would want. So when the Ultimat came out, we got one, and what we found was to do key fill in software, so we could have playback of whatever background we wanted. So you have some video background in your Memo Live or your vMix, you want to play that out. You're kicking it out via some kind of card. SDI is what we're doing, and then we're taking it back in through an SDI DeckLink Duo, and then we're using key fill, and we're able to capture and composite, put it back together, and it looks beautiful. I mean, the Ultimat's just stunning for the price. The HDMI one's like $495. I mean, this was like $70,000 a couple of years ago, so it's amazing what you can do now with an Ultimat. But if you want to use software to play out, it might be easier to look at some kind of hardware playout device, some kind of HDMI player. If you can just, like for a Santa type thing, if it's the same kind of loop, if you don't need to trigger it. I know one of the other Santas was pretty advanced and had a bunch of backgrounds to trigger with OBS. So he would need most likely the solution where you're kicking it out, then bringing it back in through some kind of key fill.
Mitch.
Yeah, Guy covered it very well. It's a really super box. And again, I'll just reiterate, Guy is absolutely right. We used to spend many dollars to have a hardware Ultimat on a set. And since the folks at Blackmagic bought it, it's a wonderful device, and they just announced it. So there's like 3 models, I believe. The middle one is the one that Santa Bart has, and it is so much more sophisticated than the keying capabilities built into your ATEM. In fact, with Santa Bart, he had a few issues with his lighting. And the middle version of the Ultimat, the $400 some version, did a much better job of controlling that. The other advantage is that you can put separate inputs into it, so you don't have to worry about a different keyer supplying a background. You can, if you have vMix or if you have a shuttle, you can input that video directly into the box, and that's going to now become part of your background plate that you have. So lots of capabilities, a huge improvement over what we're getting off our ATEM. And I think you get a very realistic key off of that.
Let's move on to Paul Wallace's question. Go ahead, Mitch.
Paul Valus is here from Austin, Texas. How did the Tony Mobley show with John Snyder go? What does it take in the back end of a Tony Mobley show?
And John Snyder is here to help us.
I might be slightly biased, but I thought it went well. And overall, it's what it takes on the back end. It's similar to office hours, but scaled down quite a bit. So it's still amazing the number of people who join together to try to do something really cool on a weekly basis, whether it's here in office hours every day or on Tony's show or Burning with Lois. People just volunteer to step and help each other, and it's fascinating to see.
Absolutely. That was so much fun. I remember I'm one of the Tony Mobley Show alums, and just watching people who have not done production throughout their career, aren't coming in as production professionals, mount a show, put it on, and succeed with dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of shows and learning all the skills. It's kind of what we're here for, and it's just really cool to see it in action. Let's go on to the next question.
David Brady, New York, New York. While looking for a rack builder template, I stumbled across this Patchbox. Looks pretty amazing to me. What does the panel think? And there's a link to it there.
John Wallace has some thoughts.
I've been intrigued by these devices for many years. The one thing I would be concerned about is what happens when that patch inside that box fails. I mean, how many of them are going to be dead before you end up replacing it? Or it's much easier just to replace a single keystone if you're doing traditional patching.
Okay. Good point I hadn't thought about. So hopefully that's helpful for you, David. Let's move on to the next question.
From Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, PA. Josh asks, one of my calendar invitees consistently reports not receiving the invites generated from Google Calendar. I assume spam folder was checked. Testing with Apple client using .me addresses have been arriving in spam. What measures to solve this?
I'm not specifically sure. I will tell you that having been a longtime Apple email client, they migrated. They originally had .mac and .me and some of these. They migrated everything to iCloud.com. Usually it's a pretty good system where if anybody uses any of those older extensions on their email address, the servers at Apple translate it instantly into an iCloud address and gets the message to you. So I'm not sure. I've never seen any significant flaws in that system, so I don't know if it's anything to do with that. Oh, David is popped in. David, do you have thoughts?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure this will be helpful, but one of my great frustrations is how Google very often doesn't trust Google. When you have a Google Calendar that you are trying to link to another a Google email address that you're trying to link to another Google email address, you're trying to receive and be able to send, via IMAP, emails from both those. 9 times out of 10, the main Google address doesn't trust, and you have to go through this convoluted of checking and unchecking and this and that. And I don't quite understand why Google would spam its own calendar invites. And yet I'm not surprised that it does.
So Gmail doesn't trust the rest of Google or something. That's interesting. And I will say that email is one of the banes of my existence because I have accounts that go back so far, and I still have things like warranty information or sign up registries that are back on the email that I've had for, going on 20 years now. And just managing the divisions between all those old email servers and living in the new world of it's difficult. John Wallace, you have some thoughts?
If your client can add you to a whitelist, but at least get you bypassed any sort of filtering that may be happening upstream. Sometimes people, like if there's using like MailChimp like we use for our notification, if someone opts out from other things that are being sent from MailChimp, sometimes you'll get removed from those lists. So there's a lot of things in play when it comes to email. You can also run your calendar invite through a spam checking service, and it'll tell you what the score would be typically across. And so and give you some tips and advice on how to make it look less like something that would get marked as spam.
And Courtney.
Yeah, John covered it very completely. Putting it on a whitelist was what I was going to mention, or approved sender list is sometimes what it's called, a whitelist is called. So check your email client and see if you can add that particular email address or even the domain to the approved sender list.
Let's move on to the next question.
From Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada, Blackmagic is showing 2 new Ultra Studio 3G devices, a recorder and monitor, small HDMI plus SDI 1080p 60 max Thunderbolt boxes, $125. When did these come out, and is anyone using them or interested?
Guy Cochran.
Yeah, these have been out for a while now, a few months at least. Here's what the lineup looks like. Keep in mind that the recorder is basically input and the monitor is output. So if you're looking at like a decimator, some of their older models or some of the models that are bidirectional, those will do both ways. So keep in mind that these will go one way in. So Thunderbolt to HDMI, or there's the SDI version as well, but terrific value. I mean, compared to what these things used to cost, I mean, it's crazy. Like the AJU taps are still 300 and something. So tremendous value. I mean, if you just need to get something in and get something out, we use these in our builds. So I know that they work. It's a great value.
Next question.
David Brady, New York asks, SPX GC running on an older Mac Mini and an ATEM Extreme, what is the best workflow to add lower thirds to other signals in this switcher? Should it be up or downstream? And what would it be key and or fill sources?
I'm really sorry that Alex isn't here today because he is our king of key workflows. He really understands this stuff extraordinarily well. John Wallace, though, has some thoughts here.
I use an upstream key. What you would do is you would either do a chroma or a luma, and then you would be able to remove either the green or black background from what you're sending out, and that would be what you would do it with. It'd be pretty simple. If you want to jump into after hours, we could get you set up in no time.
And for those of you who just are unfamiliar with it for any reason, we use the terms upstream and downstream a lot. And there's really basically in any signal flow, there is a flow. Things enter here, they go through these processes or boxes or software or whatever, and they end up over here. And so if you have something like a switcher at some point in this, the key can be created upstream of the switcher bus, or it can be created downstream after the switcher outputs it. So upstream and downstream is one of those terms that is kind of fluid and floating and really depends on the circuit diagram of what you're working with. That's just an overall kind of orientation if you're relatively new to this stuff. Let's go to the next question.
Nigel DeSalle from Austin, Texas, and here on our panel, Dante on Ventura. Who has been brave enough to try it yet?
Looks like Mitchell and John have. So, Mitch, start us out.
No, not yet. I'm worried about it. Maybe the virtual card might be the issue.
John Prado?
You didn't say M1 or M2, Apple Silicon. I've got it running on my Intel Mac, and I'm going to load it today on my M1 Mini, and I'll let Nigel know. Okay,
Nigel. So slip back here tomorrow, and hopefully we'll have sorted it out for you. Let's go to the next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida, asks, podcast.adobe.com Enhance Project Shasta was mentioned on the show yesterday. Thoughts on the Enhance tool?
I don't know if, well, there we go. Courtney's in here. Courtney, take a shot at it.
Well, I briefly looked at it. It looks very similar to what RTX, which NVIDIA is doing, and I don't know if maybe we can hear this if we won't get pulled down, since this is a sample to play it.
Did you in Google, when you shared your screen, did you hit that button in the lower left saying share audio?
I'm not sharing my screen, but I'm trying to see. Well, wait a minute. Let me see if I can bring up audio here. All right. Let me know if you're not hearing the audio.
Not hearing it.
Not hearing the audio.
I can do that for you if you'd like.
Okay, great.
So here is the sample without enhancement.
Room with the window open, and it's pretty echoey in here too. Not
and
the
now
best
I'll turn
place
on
to
the
record
enhancement.
audio. Yet with enhanced speech, all of the background noise and echo is gone.
So there you go. It makes a significant difference.
It does sound a lot like the RTX removal of audio, background sound using AI to analyze the background sound and isolate your voice from everything else. So it sounds pretty good. How it's available, I'm not sure.
Sounds great.
Online.
It sounds to me very much like the voice isolation new plugin or new click they gave us in Final Cut. So I think this algorithm is out there and is doing really good things for all the content creators out there who have marginal sound quality. John, give it to John Wallace.
They are doing a little bit of extra, so they're adding some actual qualities back into the voice versus just sampling the noises that are there and removing it. So it's very interesting to see it that they're actually trying to recreate what the sound of the voice would be using AI versus just removing the noise. That would be happening like in real time using like the RTX product.
There you go. David Brady. Oh, I'm sorry. Next question. David.
From David Brady.
Yeah,
well, that's okay.
David.
You're doing the amazing Kreskin there. David Brady from New York for a low-profile lighting rig for Zoom contribution. Think in office, no control of ambient conditions. Would a few 3-foot Pavo tubes suffice?
Guy Cochran's going to start you out.
Yeah, I would think so. It just depends on how much wattage those lights overhead, if they're typical office fluorescence versus a window or something like that. If you can block some of that and then take more control, I think the Pavo tubes. I didn't see a 3-foot there. I saw a 2-foot and a 4-foot. Either of those. You could put one on each side of the screen or one across the top. The option that Courtney gave earlier was one of these type of lights. This is also a nan light. This is one that Alex has recommended, the LumaPad. So depending on where you position the light, so if I turn off my key, so now I'm in the dark, and now I'll just take this guy running off batteries. And if you position it, somewhere around here at a 45, you can get that kind of look. And that's not even on full power, but that's the nan light LumaPad 25. It's a little bit more output.
Yeah.
Anyways,
for me,
idea.
Tubes have a definite place in lighting. They're a little uncontrollable. And so I would actually tend to look at a guy type solution where you have a panel light. And the reason is it's putting light off in a direction, which means that behind the light, there will be less lumens hitting something behind it than in front of it, which allows you to do things like keep the color of a background light more pure. Those 360-degree sources, whether it's a bare bulb or a fluorescent tube or something like that, if you turn it on to light you, it's also lighting everything behind it, in front of it, the ceiling and everything else. And it's raising the ambient level of the room overall. In lighting, I tend to want to sculpt what I'm looking at with shadows and things like that. So I want more directional sources. But in terms of a good, simple program, simple lighting tool, everybody has really spoken very highly of Pavo tubes. So if that's the kind of circumstance you're in, go for it. Let's go to the next question.
From JB Windle in Thailand, asking, I'm looking for a cage for my iPhone 14 Pro, and I was considering one from Small Rig. Do the panelists have any thoughts or recommendations?
They do. John Wallace is going to start us off. We're going to go to Mitch Hill after that. So, John?
I do not have my iPhone 14 yet, but I use the cage from Small Rig on my iPhone 13 Max, and honestly, it's great, and looking forward to getting the next one once my new phone arrives.
Mitchell?
Yeah, Small Rig is getting to be the go-to cage manufacturer and accessories. They're making everything from cages to batteries to follow focus, fizz units. I've seen their stuff, and it's great, and I have it on my Sony EV10. I always put a cage on a camera because I'm also butterfingers, and it protects the camera just a little bit better.
Yeah, I too have been impressed by their manufacturing quality. It's not super cheap. I mean, you can get things that are cheaper, but the one thing you can't argue, their machining and their quality is really good. I have one of the Small Rig cages for my iPhone. That was for the 12 Plus. And the first time I put it on, I remember that hinge cover snapping into place and feeling like it was really secure. I thought they really engineered this very, very precisely, which is always a good thing when you're dealing with production equipment. Let's go to the next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, I saw a tutorial for, David Paskin in Miami, Florida. Apparently, you can now go live to Instagram from your desktop using production software. Is this new, or am I just out of the loop?
And I do not do any of this, so I don't know. And it doesn't appear that anybody else has raised their hand to comment on this. So we may not know. David, have you been reading about this? Is there something that's intriguing you?
Well, I don't do it either. I'm not an Instagram guy, but I just, sorry, it's not working. But I just know that to certain platforms, Instagram, TikTok, there have been terms of service issues, if I remember correctly. And now this Instagram Live Producer is what they're calling it, allows you to use OBS, Streamlabs, or that's what they quote in here, or any other, presumably any other production software to do this. So seems new. And if you're looking to hit your audience and your audience is on Instagram, could be great.
Guy Cochran has some thoughts.
Or if you want to do it with hardware, I just picked up one of these things. I haven't got a chance to fully play with it and get everything connected yet, but this is the YOLO Box InStream. It's expensive. Again, we're expensive friends. This one's $1,295. But it goes, yeah, it's a pricey one. It goes directly to Instagram. It's a switcher. So, it's vertical. It's basically a big Android tablet. And then it's got HDMI as well as USB inputs. So what I want to test with it is if you could use one of those Insta360 links and then cut in between a couple cameras. So I'll let you know. I'll follow up.
John Wallace?
Over the last 3 months, TikTok has really been pushing their live platform and allowing broadcast from production software like OBS or anything else that you would use to create an RTMP stream. So this would be I would expect this as the response of Instagram to stay competitive within that space.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me because that's the model for businesses who are trying to get substantial growth. And we both know that everybody here knows that Instagram and all the rest of these services, that's their play now, is to grow and attract eyeballs. The more eyeballs they get, the more value they have to everyone. And so I'm not surprised. And that, while that may seem very expensive to some people, if you're really trying to build a following on Instagram and you want to crank out a lot of content directly, it could be the most efficient purchase you make if it ups your productivity and allows you to play in that sandbox more professionally. Let's go on to the next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, I saw a tutorial for mixing Atmos music in DaVinci Resolve. There's a link to it. Wouldn't Resolve be geared more towards video soundtracks and not music mixing?
No one's clicked in on this one at all. You remember, DaVinci Resolve originally was a color correction tool. They didn't do video editing or anything else, and they were not the world's strongest program in audio. But boy, their development arc over the past few years has been impressive and rapid. And so now they're a general purpose editor, and they incorporated the Fairlight audio system in there. So I would imagine that adding Atmos into it is just a perfectly reasonable thing for the Fairlight side of their capabilities in the software. So I'm not at all surprised. And whatever a thing you have you have an idea in your mind about the reputation and what this product was supposed to do. Remember, in this rapidly evolving world we live in now, a thing that was not strong at feature A can turn into be very strong in feature A in a very short period of time. Development is a crazy pace now. Courtney, you had some thoughts on this?
Yeah, and Dolby developed Atmos primarily for feature film distribution and play out in theaters. So that was its main goal. So it's now been adopted for music mixing to give you dimensional sound mixing with objects that you can position in 3D space. If you're playing it back in a Dolby Atmos decoded environment. So I think it's, Fairlight incorporating the supporting Dolby Atmos would allow it to be used for mixing music as well as for theatrical and film.
Plus, don't forget, the delivery space has changed. Apple was kind of pioneered that a little bit with spatial audio on all of its AirPods. So I wouldn't have had a 5.1 or a 7.1 playback thing in my living room. But the moment I bought those for my iPhone, I was able to consume spatial audio. So I think those kind of things, I'm sure the Android phones are working towards or already in the same space. And as soon as you can build that audience of people who have the systems to be able to take advantage of it, sure, all the content creation software is going to have to pay attention to that if they want to remain competitive in the world. And there's so many movies that really do get benefit from the spatial environment or something similar to it. Those something point something soundtracks really can make a movie come alive rather than just old traditional stereo. So next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington asks, Synergy lets me mouse over to another adjacent computer to control it. What can I use to send keystrokes without first mousing over to the other PC?
And John Wallace is going to help us here.
Yeah, so within Synergy, you're able to create a shortcut. I'll post a link to the chat. You can hit that shortcut. It will then focus the other desktop. Then you could use another shortcut to focus back into your primary display.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana, asked, speaking of SSDs, what are you using for nearby storage and midterm and finally long-term archiving? Is it different for video versus audio versus OS configurations?
And Mitch, you're going to help us out here.
Yeah, when I'm recording to video, I'm an old stickler for the Samsung T5, not so much with the T7. And for bit buckets, I use a RAID like from G Drive. I guess they're owned by Western Digital now. So, but they're just solid, and I like the look of them. They look kind of like a Mac Pro.
And I'm not sure how I feel about the long term because a lot of these technologies are pretty new in the history of recording. So I don't know whether that T5 that I put on a shelf and leave there for 6 years is going to be easily readable at the end of that or not. I just don't have, I'm sure there's a lot of research on it. I would check into that. I know that for decades, LTO or longitudinal tape, but just streaming tape was kind of like the computer backup, but it's kind of fallen out of favor. And I'm not sure I've seen much information about what the most stable long-term storage is. Midterm and short-term, these things are all fine. Mitchell?
Yeah, I still go with the G Drive G RAID, and I exercise it every once in a while to make sure everything's happy in it. But you're right, long-term storage is an issue because we don't have enough data to judge our, SSDs haven't been out that long, maybe about 10 years, but it can be a problem. I know that I've got a whole shelf of Betacam SP tapes that are getting hits on them and are no longer any good.
Yeah, I think this is worth because everybody is concerned with making sure that their long-term archives stay around. We'll stay on this a little bit. I'm trying to accelerate a bit because we're getting close to the end here, but let's hear from some other people. John Wallace.
I use a product called Nasuni, Nasuni, and it allows you to connect directly into Azure Glacier or into AWS Glacier or into Azure and leverage their long-term storage, which can be significantly cheap. There's no cost to ingest the data, and it's just the cost to store over time. And that gives you an NFS amount that you can actually leverage. It allows you to locally cache it as well. So you could use like the G drives, pulling that into a Nasuni, and then automatically archive off the data. And then you can also do things like have it sync across multiple devices in different geolocations as well.
Maybe cloud storage will save us after all. Courtney, your thoughts?
I use a Western Digital Cloud NAS on my network, but lately I've also been buying these little caddies for NVMe drives and just buying Samsung NVMe drives in 1 terabyte to 4 terabytes, sticking them inside these USB 3.1 USB-C connectors, and I just hang that off of a laptop, and I write a script to automatically back up things to that NVMe drive, and they're very fast for doing backups locally. And then if I need to move it to another machine, I just unplug it and carry it to another machine and plug it in. It doesn't require any power supplies or anything else, and it gives me that fast 10 gigabits per second transfer speed for copying stuff over.
Great. Let's move on to the next question.
Colin Mulcahy from Dublin, Ireland asked, new rumors suggest Apple is working on a 16-inch iPad Pro model with a mini LED display, which may launch in Q4 2023. Would it make a nice shared screen display for teleprompters?
John Snyder?
It seems to me like it'd be very expensive, and a teleprompter just needs to be a dumb screen typically, and to pay for a whole iPad and all of its functionality so you can see one thing seems like a lot.
Courtney, real quick.
I'm against using iPads or anything in the universe for teleprompting because getting files on and off them is problematic. It's better, like you said, just to use a dumb screen because it can easily be inversed. And the screen itself needs to be able to have left-right inverse or mirroring built into it because sometimes you want to send that signal out to multiple screens. Some of them are going to be viewed directly and some of them are going to be viewed in mirrors. So if you invert the signal before it goes out and distributes it, then it's going to be backwards and the mirrors are backwards on the standalone screen. So each individual monitor needs to be able to reverse for teleprompter use.
Next question.
TJ Asher, Minneapolis, Minnesota asked, Final Cut Pro, is there a way to see what an original clip's frame rate was in Final Cut Pro after I have imported the media?
Most cases, yes. Most cases, that information, the metadata will flow in with it. So the inspector is your friend. Go look for it and make sure that you click on not the basic view, but one of the extended metadata views. And I would bet that frame rate is hiding in there. Now, if they don't publish it, the easiest way is to get your original clip and dump it on something like Media Info, which is a little utility that will read back all that stuff. And then there's something I think John Barker made as well that does that. But you should be able to find it. Final Cut is really good about bringing in any metadata that comes in with the files. Let's move on to the next question.
From Khalid Al-Juma from Hassa, Saudi Arabia. Hi, hey, Alex and Office Hours community. I found you an application that may solve all your problems. Cheatlayer.com uses AI to record actions like clicks, movements, and scrolls across any program and browser and turn them into automation.
Why does that scare me somehow? Let's go to John Wallace.
So this is using a process called robotic process automation. Essentially, it's a screen share that's going to move a mouse or replicate clips, keystrokes, whatever it is. Lots of different people offer different products that kind of do the same thing. If you have an Office 365 license, you have some of this at your fingertips using Power Automate. So just take a look at it. Definitely a cool way to do some normal things that may happen throughout your day. It could be as simple as opening all the apps up on your computer that you would normally do, to if there's some sort of thing where you have to copy and paste a bunch of data from a website into Excel, it can actually do that as well. So there's definitely some cool functionality that you can use and get creative with, but it's not going to solve all your problems, unfortunately.
David Paskin, real quick.
I use Keyboard Maestro to sort of AI-based move my mouse around. For the Insta360 Link, for example, they don't have hotkeys yet for the presets. And so I use Keyboard Maestro to just track my mouse. I show it where I want it to go and click, and it does it for me. Not 100% reliable, but not bad.
And next question.
Colin Mulcahy in Dublin, Ireland asked, due to availability of consoles, I'm looking at the Allen & Heath SQ5 over the Midas M32R Live. Anyone using the SQ5 with Dante? Any thoughts and experiences?
John Wallace is going to try to help us out here. John?
Yeah, the Allen & Heath mixers are great. I've used them several times with Dante. I've had no issues with the cards. Make sure your firmware's up to date. That's one thing I would take into consideration. Understand any caveats that are in that software. Sweet. I love the DPAC EQ compression dynamics. It's definitely a much more powerful mixer than the M32, and I think you'll reap the benefits of that.
Next question.
Taylor Sunderhouse in Cincinnati, Ohio. When working with breakout rooms in Zoom meetings, can you add and remove breakout rooms without closing all breakout rooms?
David Paskin.
You can indeed, there with three caveats. Number one, you have to ask Zoom to enable it on your account. Number two, you have to enable it. You yourself have to go in and enable it in the breakout room settings. And number three is that it's one of those settings that everybody in your meeting has to be on at least 5.9.3 or higher. So it's one of those settings that's going to force people to upgrade their client.
Next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. Lots of channels that I follow are getting weird strikes lately. There's a Twitter link there. Just got one this morning on a clip that was obviously fair use that someone put on manually. What can the average creator do about these kinds of hits?
And it looks like nobody's raised a hand on this, which I understand. Alex is really very, very good at this. He does this a lot. So this may be time to come back tomorrow if you can. Add the same question, and Alex will probably be able to give you a deeper dive into that, although David Paskin is going to try to help us with some.
I was just going to say nothing. Because these are not human beings that are, saying this is a bad post. These are computer bots, and you can try and contact support, but best of luck to you.
Sadly, that sounds like really good advice here. Let's go on to the next question.
From Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin. Anyone play with vMix 26 beta yet? Vertical HD presets, Gaussian blur, SRT multitrack, some of the new features.
I have not, and I don't know anybody who has. Has anybody got vMix up and running and runs it a lot in the beta? I'm not seeing anybody on the panel now, so this is maybe another one that we swing and a miss on today, but come back tomorrow, re-enter the question, Jeffrey, and come back on the panel again. We haven't seen you in too long, but whatever works for you. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question from Douglas Carmichael. When do you use STP Ethernet cabling as opposed to UDP? The Wave SoundGrid platform requires it.
Mitch Hill.
I was going to say something funny about Andy Granatelli and STP, but I have a feeling it's too old.
Boy, I barely even remember Andy Granatelli, and I'm ancient. So there you go. Let's go on to the next question.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas is in. Elon Musk changed his title on Twitter to Chief Twit, to which the real Chief Twit, who's Leo Laporte, said, So that was his response. Maybe we should talk. What would they talk about?
Well, you'll have a chance to maybe find out the answer to this question. I believe the next Gray Matters podcast, Leo Laporte is going to be the guest. So this is a good chance for you to sample that new process. So look up Gray Matters, and you'll be able to get a long interview with Leo Laporte from one of the best interviewers who has ever been. It'll be fun. Michael Krasny is great at doing this kind of stuff and really reveals a lot. So maybe that's one of the things that he'll reveal. John Preto has a thought, and David Paskin does too. John?
Leo has held this title for however long Twitter is old now, 17 years or 18 years. And I remember when Twitter first started, where he was complaining about Twitter and their violation of possible intellectual property, but they had raised too much money for him to fight them. So it ought to be an interesting battle.
David Paskin.
Yeah, I have a question. If you trademark a name, does that trademark, is that enforceable on a platform like Twitter? If someone chooses the username that you've trademarked, is that enforceable on these social network platforms?
That would be a question for an intellectual property lawyer. And every time I've ever talked to one, and I've had 2 instances in my life when I've talked to them, they always start with one of the things we do. It depends. I think that's often built off case law and argument and defense of ideas that may be encoded into the law, but that aren't specific. You can do. They very seldom give you can do this and you can't do that. And it's like under these 27 conditions, you can do that. And under those 138 conditions, you can't do that. And then how much are you willing to spend to defend you wanting to do it if you get into a kerfluffle with that? Courtney?
As a holder of a couple of registered trademarks, I can tell you that you can, I've used a registered trademark to take a domain away from someone else who was using that trademark on the internet in the same service. If it's for a product or service and somebody else is using that name online in any way that's publicly available, and they're in a competing service. In other words, they're offering a competing product or service so that there could be confusion between the two, your trademark and their use of the name. You can get them to pull it down. Most trademark lawyers will tell you that. And if it's registered, you can sue them for back money, and they have to pay that, and they have to pay your legal fees. If it's not registered, if you've just used it with a little TM and not the circle R. Circle R indicates that you've registered the trademark with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. If you just use TM, if you start using the name and put a TM after it publicly and no one else challenges it, you can say, well, that's your trademark since this amount of time, and you have to show proof of how long you've been using it publicly. But you register it when it's registered with the U.S. Patent and Trademark, then you have a lot more rights as far as lawsuits, and you have a bigger hammer to use on anybody else who's using your trademark.
Absolutely. I agree with all of those things. All right. We've managed to make it essentially to the top of the hour. We're just some seconds shy of it, which means we're going to go into our second hour content for today. And today we're talking about content for training. And I thought this might be something worth discussing here in the kind of the transition period, because it's a generalized subject and a lot of people are looking to use the tools that we talk about here every day to make some money. And one of the biggest areas of content for pay is the training area. It's exploded over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years in video training since I got into it back in the days of creating content on VHS tapes to send out to stores, to use on VHS playback machines in training rooms. Everything has changed over the course of the last 15 or 20 years. And now you've got these gigantic services like YouTube who have, a good chunk of their content really could be bucketed in the idea of training. Everybody who does, let me show you how to do this. Everybody who does, let me show you how to put your makeup on. That is all structured training of one kind or another. So part of the process today was to talk a little bit about how should you approach the subject. If you're going to create some kind of training content, what are some basic things to think about? And when I was thinking about putting this together today, I was lucky because my wife spent many years in the education industry and was a school teacher first, and then they elevated her to being an instructional specialist for a relatively large school district. And she has not only is degreed in education, but also has studied it for a long time. So I just asked her, what are some simple things? We're not going to try to teach you how to be a trainer here, but what are some things, if you are thinking about doing this, if you're thinking about crafting some training content, maybe for your boss or for a small business somewhere, you just want to maybe start exploring this as a way to add extra income and things. What are the fundamental things in training that you should at least keep top of mind as you go down this path? And she gave me some, I think, very good advice. The very first one she gave me was this question, which is, if you start any training process and don't say, what is your goal, you're going to be in deep trouble, because this stuff is all pretty structured. And she said at the end of this video, that you asked this question, at the end of this video, what do you want the learner to know or do? So if you keep that in mind, you're going to drive toward this. And one of the other words she used is the objective. What is the objective of the training? And it can be one, or it could be a couple of things, but it is, what am I going to try to do? So I'm going to do just a couple of slides here for here's an idea. So you want to do some medical receptionist training. So you have to kind of set up your objective here. And this is the traditional kind of formal way she said it would happen in learning theories. You will say the learner will be able to greet somebody entering the office. And I apologize, I'm going to read these only because I'm mindful of the fact that some people are just listening to the show, they're not watching. The learner will will know how to sign in. The learner will know how to determine insurance verification. So you get this little list of objectives or sub-objectives in your training program, so and it doesn't have to be that formal. Whoops, let's go to there. It may be something just like this. So in your training, you're going to say in your video, be friendly and smile, greet the patient, make eye contact, check the patient forms for accuracy, and copy their insurance cards. And maybe that's enough for this little module of training to how to check in, but to have these ideas in mind before you ever start actually writing or creating anything. The other thing is, everybody's heard the tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them to have. She said that that's actually more important to do it kind of this way. Tell them what to do and then show them what to do, and then build in time for practice, because practice always makes training more effective. And the example that she gave me is, if you were going to sit down with a 5-year-old and teach them how to make a paper airplane, that process is kind of necessary. You want to tell them, we're going to make a paper airplane. We've got some time on our hands and I need to entertain you for a while. So here's a sheet of paper. We're going to turn it into a paper airplane. So you tell them that we're going to make a paper airplane. Then you demonstrate for them how to make all the folds to craft the paper airplane. You'd fly the paper airplane. And then the next part, the practice part, is really what drives that training piece into the person. So then you're going to sit with them, fold them, help, fold the paper, explain why it's important to make sharp creases or to get the pages together even or whatever. But it's the practice side that really determines whether or not the training sticks. So those are just some basic things that she wanted to start out on. From there, we're going to go to questions. Hopefully you will have some interesting questions over the course of this, or we will have a short day today, but let's at least dive into the first question we have here.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Mitch was out of there. I didn't look over. Sorry.
Sorry. I was rolling back and forth. Brandon Buttram from Indianapolis, Indiana asks, what are the best platforms for distributing, monetizing training content you produce?
That's a tough question, but John Snyder is going to help us. And I know John has been in this business for a long time. So, John?
Yeah, one quick clarifying question for you, Bill. Are we speaking mostly about video in training environments?
Yeah, I think most of the people who are watching this show are technologists and want to do that. We can talk about any other aspects of training that you want to add to discuss it, but I think most of the people here practice these arts, and I was just trying to figure out how do we help them if they're thinking about maybe I can do some training content and make a little extra money on the side these days.
Yeah, there's, so I can answer this question. There's two main platforms for anyone to market and sell their own personal training materials directly to a consumer. The ones that I'm familiar with are one's called Coursera and one's called Udemy. And I think when you think of the world of training, and especially corporate training, there's $100 to $350 billion a year spent on training, and 25 to 40% of that is wasted. There's a lot of arguments on how much there is. And so there's a huge market for someone who can make effective training materials, because training is designed to have that behavior change like Bill was talking about. That being said, it's hard to make money selling content on Coursera and Udemy because it's a huge platform. It's like YouTube, where a few people will make probably a lot of money. It's much more cost effective, probably. If I was entering the market as myself, as someone trying to build training content for other companies, I would do it off of personal relationships and trying to build individual contracts with specific companies. That way you have that relationship and you can show over time how effective you are.
That's, I think, a very good point. John Preto?
So the platform, ironically enough, that's here in Vegas is called Lightspeed VT. They've been in business 22 years. They've got a whole platform and system other than just adding videos to a CRM. They've got social networking built in it. They've got certification built into it. They help you with the marketing. They've got studios here to film your work. It's an amazing platform, Lightspeed VT. Tons of people using this: Tony Robbins, Grant Cardone, Zig Ziglar, a lot of the top guys, the bar rescue guys using their platform. They've got really good rates. It's an amazing platform.
So there are tons of services out there because this is such a big market. I mean, a lot of people need it. It can seem daunting to break in. You know, what if I can't play on that level? Can I still play? So let me tell you the story of how I landed one of my first clients. My wife and I were thinking about it, and she was thinking about leaving public education. And we thought, you know, we can do videos, and I'm an instructional specialist. I know how to craft these things. We should really look for a client who maybe needs some training. And we were looking, I was actually looking through the want ads one day, and I noticed that a local firm, pretty big one, PetSmart, I think they had like 40 stores or something like that in their network there, were hiring a new training director. And I said, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. If they're hiring a new training director, they may be coming from out of town. Maybe they don't have local contacts. So maybe it's a useful thing to try to go pitch them about the fact that we could help them with the training. And at that point, I was shooting literally on like a high-8 camcorder. I was very unsophisticated, but I knew that the combination of Linda's expertise in structuring the training and my ability, at least because I had done it for a while, to capture content on a camcorder, put it in an editing system, and get something out the other end, that maybe this would be useful. So I thought, how do I even get through? So I called the receptionist. It was really nice. The reception, have you hired a new training director yet? And I got no for the first week and no for the second week. And the third week I got, yes, we've hired somebody. His name's Tom. And he starts on Tuesday. So I waited another week to give Tom a little time to settle in. And then I thought, now, okay, so I'm going to send him a tape with some of the stuff that I've done. but how do I even get through? I mean, the tape may be interesting, may or may not have time, but I want to, he's probably going to get inundated here. So I did something that turned out to really work, and it shocked me that it worked, which is that you're in the pet business. So I'm going to buy a little stuffed dog, put a bow around its neck, add my little resume to that and the tape, and send that as a little package over there. And so it took me a couple more calls and a couple more days, but eventually somebody switched me to Tom. And in the first 2 sentences after I said, "Hi, I'm Bill Davis, and this is my company made," the first thing he said to me is, "You're the guy who sent the dog." And I've never forgotten that lesson. In these worlds where tons of people want something, to stand out even a little bit can make all the difference in the world. He remembered me over all the people who were knocking on the door because of that little thing I did that was different. To make a long story short, he said, "No, I don't have any training work right now, but it's nice to meet you. And if something happens and we need somebody, I'll keep you in mind." Went away for 2 weeks. And then I got a call from Tom, and he said somebody was out shooting in one of our PetSmart doors and stores. The stuff came back, and all I could focus on was the sound of crickets. They have crickets in the stores as feeders for the people who own reptiles and things like that. And he said, it drove me crazy. Do you guys want to come in and talk to me? And so being in front of mind, having a circumstance where they suddenly needed somebody, and having just been memorable, we got a shot. And that shot led to about 14 years of work and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in work. But that was the breakthrough piece for me. It was being ready and understanding how to do, finding a way to get to the person who is probably going to need training. And, all the back end stuff, if you want to do this for a living, you've got to figure out ways to get clients, and you've got to figure out ways to get work coming in so that you can learn, grow, advance. Over those first 2 years, I was able to buy better equipment. We got repetitions on how to do it better. Linda always had the theory, but the theory has to be matched with practice. So I like telling that story because we didn't start with anything, and we ended up with a solid client that lasted for many years because we went through the steps, I think, in the right order and correctly. Let's move on to the next question.
From Chad Lafarge in Columbia, Missouri, Chad asked what APIs or reference models are important for creation tools and hosting platforms to use to make content usable on multiple platforms.
John Snyder again. Great.
And this is why I asked if it's about video or other training content. If you're building e-learning modules, the most common that you would come across is the older versions called SCORM. I think that stands for Subject Content Object Reference Model or something like that. And the new one is XAPI. And there are ways to measure what happens when the learner is consuming the content, including how long they're spending on different pages and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, PA, asks, what are the traps to avoid that can result in a loss of your audience attention and confidence as an instructor when creating content?
No one's popped in on this one, but that's interesting that you say that, because my next thing, I had a couple of slides here on red flags that I remember through the course of my career crafting training. We got into situations where either clients asked for something that was kind of a little danger zone, or that I didn't know. Linda helped me avoid these things, but let me just show you a couple of them. Maybe it'll spark a little more discussion about what to do and what not to do. The first one I call red flags. We ran into a couple of circumstances where, we need to make our next training film funny. So let's do something where we model the most gross bad behavior we can and then tell them why not to do that. And the point she made to me is that it's really easy when you try to do that they'll remember the don't, which was more powerful and more funny, more engaging than the do. So you can actually end up fighting yourself in terms of the training content. The other thing she mentioned to me is, remember that video is passive. So watch and forget is a danger. If you don't use some of the other techniques and you don't do anything other than just show them a video, it's going to be tough to make the learning stick unless that's the kind of person who can absorb information. And she talked a lot to me about the different kinds of target audiences. If you're talking to a CEO, these are very high functioning people and things like that, and they can absorb a lot of material and integrate it and pull out lessons from it. Another learner may not be as sophisticated, and if you throw them that same complex idea, they're just going to get overwhelmed and it's not going to make sense to them. So she talked a lot about making sure that what you're doing fits the audience you're targeting. And it's I think a little bit of a trap to think, can I constantly do silly things or funny things or goofy things to keep their attention, and to lose sight of the fact that at the heart, you're still trying to get back to that objective. At the end of this training, have you made a difference for the learner? Are they going to remember something? Are they going to be able to do that? If you're doing something like forklift training, are they going to be able to operate it safely because you've managed to get through to them how important it is to do that? John Snyder, more thoughts?
Another common trap is spending more time than you need on the training and trying to make it perfect. Most training material gets updated over time, so it's helpful to be flexible in how you build your training modules or learning content, something that's easy to edit or change, as well as deciding when it's not worth the extra investment to spend more time to make it that 1% better.
Absolutely. Courtney?
Don't get stuck in a talking head. That's the easiest way to lose everybody. If you're just, whatever you're talking about, whatever the subject matter, show examples, and don't just put up a list and go through the list. That's not a solution to the talking head. You actually have to show examples of whatever you're demonstrating in use, or highlighted, or show the widget and how to turn the widget, what to do with the widget. Use the audio, use the visual side of that audio-visual presentation to, convey a lot more information. A picture's worth 1,000 words is the old adage, and it's really true.
And Guy Cochran.
It depends on if it's in person or if it's online or recorded. When I was in person doing a lot of training, I would go around the room and see what everybody did. And then I would use their position or their name. If they're a wedding videographer, I would say, and like Bill over here, who's a wedding videographer, he might use a soft ProMist filter for this shot. And it ropes them in. People love to hear their name. So when you reach out to them, it makes them stand up and really pay attention. So that's one. The other thing is just relevancy. I mean, stay on topic. Try to give them a nugget, or even like the weatherman does on the news, where you're saying, stay tuned for this, and they'll lead you on for a little bit. So if you can plant some nuggets that you'll get to at the end, that keeps people in anticipation as well. And
Mitchell.
All good points. I agree with all of them. I especially agree with what Courtney was saying. Talking heads don't get it done. A lot of times people just get lazy and they don't spend time doing a decent script with decent demos, decent historical and interest, and the programs run long, and people just don't want to stare at talking heads doing this stuff. My friend and I, we do a lot of productions together, we call it video Cuisinart. We just, some people just throw all the stuff they've got that they just went out and shot one day and somehow try to craft a story out of it. It's not the way to do it. You should do it with a lot of planning.
Yeah, it's been interesting for me. I've been working on these Final Cut training things, and it's an interesting, it fights against some of my beliefs in training, but it's also its own thing. So I start out by trying to set up and craft an hour on a subtopic in the overall thing. And in the Final Cut training I've been doing, I'm doing it kind of geographically around the program. Here's the import module and the keyword thing over, that's number one. Number two is the viewer and how it works. Number three is the inspector. And I'm going around the horn doing that. But inside each of those, it's been really interesting because I'm trying to put together an hour about each of those areas to talk about the specifics. And yet I understand that an hour of exposition is not the best way to deliver training. But I'm taking those hours and then I'm going in and I'm trying to mark up and figure out the right way to make them addressable, indexable, and so that with a table of contents at the front, eventually people will be able to click on them and go to the sub lessons, and they're averaging about 2 to 3 minutes a piece. And I think they will end up being the standalone actual training modules that this eventually will look like. But I had to go through the whole flow of it And so it's very much like editing for me. You start out with all the footage, you maybe do a string out and figure it out, but then you're going to start going down to the micro level to figure out what is the absolute most important and most concise thing I can tell them right now to help them do it. But you start with so much, and then you have to winnow and winnow and winnow. And the point that I'm trying to make here in content for training, that process we went through over and over again. We started out with the broad thing. Let me get all the ideas. Let me get all the things I need to teach them about this. And then by the process of careful editing, winnowing, focusing, you get down to what actually is the most powerful thing to teach somebody about this particular topic at this time. And it's probably going to take me some months to get down to the point where I'm happy with those little nuggets of training, but I had to start with the big things first, or I wouldn't have known where the nuggets fit into the flow. Mitchell, your thoughts?
Yeah, I've caught a couple of your demonstration and instructions on Final Cut Pro on Fridays here on many of these same stations. And you're very well done. I mean, you're a good storyteller. Another person I like a lot is Andrew Kramer, who is I guess he is the After Effects spokes guy out there for doing tutorials. And it's just some people have a natural ability to entertain while they're talking, like you do. Andrew does it. He does it in a very offbeat kind of way and uses all kinds of crazy examples. But it's some people can do it really well. Some people don't. I guess the trick is don't pick people like me, that aren't really great storytellers, and find the people that have a connection to their audience, because they'll hold their attention, and that's all part of the whole training process.
Yeah, I thank you for the compliment, but let me tell you, well, the first time I did modules 1, 2, and 3, I went back and I realized that just telling the stories wasn't cutting it, that I needed more structure. And so I started changing the outlines, and I started actually doing some pieces as scripted as opposed to just extemporaneous, because I could more tightly pack in the information I wanted to give to somebody in that. And so I started doing this. I'll tell a story, but then I'm going to deliver this piece of shorter content in 90 seconds or in 2 minutes. And then I'm going to tell another little story, or I'll just go through something I think that is easy to understand. And then we'll get to another thing that I think they really need to understand, and I'll craft that as another piece. And my structure changed as I reviewed what I had done first and decided I could tighten it up, make it better, tighten it up, make it better. And now I'm in the stage where I have to edit and tighten up even tighter than what it was before. And it's a process. It's never just, I don't know anybody in my life who's able to sit down and off the top of their head be perfect at these kinds of things. It's just too complex if you really want to make something good. The amount of work that goes into a training program can sometimes be daunting. Guy, your thoughts?
Yeah, back in the early 2000s, I was a Final Cut trainer. I trained Final Cut in every major city across the United States, and I worked for a company called DV Creators and developed some of the courseware as well. And back in those days, you really wanted to be cutting edge and know what was out there and keep people, kind of entertained with here's what's coming out, or you couldn't leak beta stuff, but you want to keep everything tight and be well rehearsed, because that's the thing, is you don't want to be Mickey Mouse and looking around for a file. You want everything solid. So when we would do these shows, we would do Macworld. I've spoken at Macworld, NAB, some of the other conferences back then that are no longer out there. But yeah, we were rehearsing till midnight or 1 o'clock for a show the next day, and we would do 3, 4, 5 passes just to make sure that nothing crashed. I mean, back then, Final Cut was a little could be iffy on depending on how hard you were pushing it. So, and some people like that walking the tightrope type atmosphere where I would take out a camera and shoot something right there on the spot and bring it in. People love that spontaneity and they love seeing their stuff in it. So if you could rope them in again, pull something from live, and then when you're using it in your presentation, something that was theirs, it just lights people up, because they're like, "Wow, that's not canned footage. He shot it right here. This is stuff that we're using." So anytime that you can do the inclusion thing, pull people in, so your audience feels like they're a part of it.
Yeah, if you think any of these people who are on stage at a major event aren't rehearsed to the nines. I've been fortunate enough to be backstage where high-level presenters are presenting to large groups. And what I've seen more times than I can tell you is the next presenter or the presenter after that roaming around quietly backstage. And in their mind, they are going through once again, after 30 practices, they are right before they walk out on stage, once again, going through exactly what they're going to do in their presentation. They're crafted because you've got a lot of attention, a lot of people, and you've got a lot of mission to accomplish in the time you have on stage or something like that. And with a video, it's the same thing. You've got a mission here. I mean, people are going to be clicking on your YouTube link or whatever it is. And if they come away unsatisfied or bored, or you didn't take the time to make something that's worthy of their time, they'll let you know. Next question.
Yeah, the folks are getting in the zone, so to speak. Next one in from Brandon Buttram in Indianapolis, Indiana. What is the best approach to crafting content for non-neurotypical learners, such as those with ADHD or dyslexia, for example?
John Snyder, some thoughts?
I'm of the opinion that human brains are human brains, and though some function slightly differently, they're all benefit from the same principles. So I would say be accessible as possible, including make sure you have transcripts of any video so that people can read along or rewind or follow back. The nice thing about video is people can choose the speed at which they view it. So that's a really nice thing to do. And make sure your content is targeted to a specific purpose, like Bill's been talking about, and you're not distracting with stuff that's unnecessary.
Yeah, I 100% along with all of that. I do find it comforting to know that when somebody has a learning, I want to get away from saying learning styles and things like that, because learning is learning to a certain degree. But if somebody needs to rewind, you can't do that in the real life in a presentation, but you can go back. I know I tend to be out walking and listening to content, and sometimes the interface that I'm walking with says, this is your mileage, this is your time, and things like that. And I go, I got distracted by that, and I missed that piece of content and what I was listening to. So I have to go back if I want to maintain, if that was, I think, an important story point in the story that I'm listening to. And learners do the same thing. All of a sudden you're in the process and maybe you're mostly engaged, but your phone pings and it's your family and you're going, oh my God, is there a crisis? And you're taken out of that for a minute. In the real world, if that's exactly at the moment, somebody's giving you the key concept to something, you can't really rewind. I love that about the technology and random access technology, more and more training. I mean, I'm spending a lot of time with this training for Final Cut, trying to think ahead about how to chapterize, how to mark, how to get people a navigation system inside the training so that they can go where they need to and get what they need to out of it. And there are systems now, we've all seen that, right? You're on YouTube and you have all these, it's broken things down. It's doing transcription and things like that. And maybe you can search on the transcription. And instead of having to start at the top and wait for the content you're really looking for, you can drive directly to that. That's the point of learning management systems and these computer systems, to be able to let people do that. Get to the material you need as fast as possible and do the job of helping your learner learn. Courtney, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of it's been mentioned already. As many neural pathways as you can excite, the better. So auditory, by speaking the instructions, captioning, or slides where you're showing highlighting the points in text. And even in some places that for learning, tell people to write them down. Write down these 4 things. I'm going to ask you which one you think is the most popular or the best or whatever later. So kind of like a pop quiz, so that you call back to the instruction later, and that refreshes the information later, so that makes sure that it's stuck. So that's kind of important to recap or test the memory to make sure it's working by offering some type of little quiz or something at the end to make sure that you're getting good retention.
and be agile, because things do change. I mean, I've experienced it here on this show. One of those deadly sins that I used to tell people about: never read your slides to the audience. You're essentially telling you're too dumb to do it. But then I realized, wait a second, I'm on office hours. I've got people who are seeing the slide, but I've got people who are not seeing the slide. So if I just use that rule because it's good for my live in-person audience, am I taking something away from the people who are listening in a radio mode? That is not serving them. So all of a sudden, my rule has to change. And in fact, you saw me do that today. I said, this is important for audiences, maybe not exactly like you, but it's important for me to get the information out to as many people as I can. So maybe I have to break my own rule and read some of the slide bullets, because if I don't do that, the people who can't see my presentation can only hear it. They can get the content too. So you got to be agile, and you've got to keep changing, you've got to keep up, and you've got to know your audience. And if nothing else is changing in this world, the ability to reach varieties of different audiences all over the world. Might not be the right language, might be there's all sorts of possibilities that we have to account for if we truly want to serve as many people as we can. Courtney Gooden next.
I forgot to mention remove remove distractions so that people aren't, especially people with ADHD, can be distracted by something as simple as like the fan turning in the background. If that fan were turning around, that could be distracting. So avoid visual distractions in your frame.
Yeah, if you're aware of it and trying your best, I think you'll get a break. Mostly, we all make mistakes, and we all, oh gosh, that didn't work for these folks over there. I will try harder next time to make it work for them. But you can't do it perfectly. But you got to continue to try, because there's a lot of difference in the world. And again, if your goal is to reach the maximum number of people, you should try as many ways as you can. Let's go on to the next question.
Squirrel? Oh, okay. Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, PA, asks, what are the factors in determining the length of training content?
Oh, boy. I used to say my answer for my clients when they ask me, how long do you think this should be? My answer was exactly as long as it takes to get the message across, and not a second longer. And that goes back to this preparation for knowing your objectives, knowing your what you're trying to get accomplished. What do they need to take away from this? And then compacting it as much as you can through the writing, production, editing, and everything else, so that you don't waste their time in trying to meet those objectives that you have set for yourself. John Snyder?
A good rule of thumb is 2 to 5 minutes for a point. Whether it's in a room setting, a live setting, have a different activity every 2 to 5 minutes, not just videos for an hour long, 12 videos, 5 minutes long, but do a 5-minute video, discuss for 5 minutes, that sort of a thing. If you're building training videos, again, it's about 2 to 5 minutes is a good time, because it depends a lot on how the person's consuming the content. In the corporate world, sometimes people are picking up a video between meetings and think, how much time do you have between a meeting? 2 to 5 minutes. It's a good amount of time to get a point across, to be able to exposit some deeper points at that 5-minute time frame. And it's really rare that you need more than 5 minutes for a single specific thing. And maybe a module is a group of 4 5-minute blocks or 10 2-minute blocks. But think in terms of, how can I get one chunk in 2 to 5 minutes so my learners can take it at their own pace?
I love that. And I love chunk. And I've actually thought about chunkification as a new word, because I'm taking these longer things and trying to make them into useful, targeted, shorter things. And that's why I started rewriting these to do that process. Next question.
Rob Collins in Kansas City, Missouri asked, could office hours itself be used for production training? And if so, what parts of production?
I think it's fair to say that we're flirting with that a good little bit in a lot of the things we're doing. The cooking shows that Alex was mounting before, those are training oriented. The thing I'm doing with Final Cut is specifically for this, and it's a test bed for me to learn to adapt some of my former ideas to this new world that we have. I think there's a lot of, I think office hours is kind of a hotbed of a lot of us thinking about this and trying to come up with good things. John Prado, you had thoughts?
So we kind of ad hoc created these assessment tests for media production. I think it's probably a good start for somebody that's interested. I've got those available. If you hit me up in Discord, I can send you. I've got audio, video, production. There's 5 tests total. That's a good place to start.
Yeah, I found those really interesting. The assessments of, it takes kind of like the global wisdom of all the folks here at Office Hours, and John was able to craft a whole bunch of, if you want to be kind of, it's not so much certified, you could think about it like that, but nobody's going to ask you for certification. But if you want to test your knowledge of a topic, it gives you a sense of how well you're doing versus the knowledge base. And I found them fun to take, too. And it also pointed out, I don't know that about that topic. I thought I was pretty good in that topic, but there was an area that I'm weak in. So that was useful to me as well. Let's go to the next question.
Josh Kaufman is weighing in from Pittsburgh, PA. Is it best to specialize content for a specific demographic or generalize for the widest possible distribution?
John, give us some help.
Think about your audience. And if you know what you're trying to do, your audience should drive how deep you go in it. If you're thinking of just entering the industry, I suspect it'll be people will find more success diving deep in a specific industry vertical, like training the medical field, creating content for medical field, versus trying to say like customer service training, which is really broad. There's a lot of stuff already on YouTube that people are already searching for. So I think generally specialization is a good way to enter the market. It might be a little bit higher risk and reward there, but that's probably where I would start.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think it's good to know what you are interested in, what you're passionate about. And if you can find a client that aligns with what you like, I think you will naturally find it more interesting to work on their programs. I tell the story, I do like pets. We've always had them. So that when I got that chance to pitch a company, I saw PetSmart, I went, that would be a good fit. I'm comfortable in that environment. I had another circumstance where we got reached out to after we had some significant success with them. I got reached out to by a meat packing plant locally. And I went and met with them, and I thought, I'm not sure I want to take my camera out onto the floor of the slaughterhouse every day and create content. Fine business. I got nothing against your business. And I know some people do and some people don't, but I just not sure I want to do that. So aligning your clients, if you can, with your personal goals and objectives can be a powerful motivator for you. I mean, sometimes if you're just trying to put food on the table for the kids or something like that, you take what you can get. And I'm all about that. You gotta have your priorities in order. But if you can get a client that you feel really good about, it really does accelerate. I mean, the people that I was able to work with through those 12, 14 years of creating content for them, I just like them. We all we're very simpatico. I adopted too many stray dogs, but other than that, it was a great adventure. Not too many. Every one of them was worth it. Let's go to the next question.
From Brandon Brettram and Indianapolis, Indiana, how could you adapt the traditional approaches to crafting training content to make it work for small, cooperative learning styles, groups over Zoom?
So group instruction, and I wish my wife was here today because she's the one who really knows this stuff. John, I know, has also tons of training in the educational space. Group learning is something that we've done forever. There are certain kinds of activities and things like that you can do in the group setting that's very hard to do and to match over Zoom. And to me, that's I would have to really say that somebody should study this pretty carefully. In Zoom, you have the group dynamic, but the group dynamic is a little more formal, and you can't really, maybe there will be a way later for break off into groups of 3 and discuss this, and then each group of 3 presents to the larger group about what you determine. That kind of training activity happened over and over and over in the corporate training world that I was involved in, because the activities end up supporting the overall goals of the class, and you get that divergence or diversity of opinions with the different groups. And you also get an idea that everybody could share, or that could be shared with everybody as a way to identify those kind of ideas. John, you had more thoughts on this?
Yeah, virtual instructor-led training or training over Zoom, for example, is very similar to in the classroom, but you're competing against email. And a couple things I strongly recommend anyone do is, first of all, make sure your learners have their cameras on so you can see if they're confused, if they're following along, if they're bored. And secondly, make sure you have someone there who's assigned to be a producer of sorts who can help with all the stuff in the back end so the instructor can focus on instructing and the producer can focus on helping all the learners.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember years ago I was called into Proctor down in Tucson for a group that was teaching on Final Cut, and it was interesting. There were two of us who were proctoring. The woman who had written the book about it was very good at it. Gave the presentation. She was highly skilled and knew what to do. But that process of having proctors in the room so you could go over to somebody and solve problems, keep them up to speed, whether it was a technical problem with the delivery of it, whether it was they'd gotten behind it, didn't know what button to click on next to catch up with the group, facilitation by people who were engaged in the learning process, I thought was a tremendous value add in the training mode that we were in there. And so I'm not quite sure how that happens. That requires some back-end plumbing, I would think, to say you're watching the seminar, but we've noticed you have this question, and somebody can go into a private loop and help get that person their concerns taken care of so that they can rejoin the group and know where the group is and succeed with them. I know too many circumstances where somebody gets lost and they just zone out. And John's point about having their cameras on, incredibly important, because you can see that in the real world in a classroom. They're just gone and I've got to figure out how to get them back, as opposed to on Zoom where all you see is their name on a black screen. You're never going to get them back. You don't know what they're doing. Next question.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA asked, what are some novel ways to solicit interaction from the trainee that can be included in training content? What about gamification?
It's been a buzzword for a good long time now, and some very effective training uses that. We do have, I will say, we have generations now who have participated in all sorts of online gaming, and the statistics about how engaged they are off. Some people spend their whole lives in there. That's not always. I don't think that's the only way. But let's see what John Preto has to say and what Courtney has to say. John?
So Lightspeed has gamification built into it, and some of their corporate clients, it has a dashboard of a leaderboard of who's doing the best in training. For specific clients, it's working well. Yes.
Courtney.
As long as it's knowledge-based gamification, if it's eye-hand coordination, in other words, the first person to click on the right answer wins. You're gonna reinforce their reaction times, but maybe not their retention of the information.
Yeah, I'm also a little leery of anything where, I look up and I'm, third to the last on the gamification scoreboard. Am I really now interested in the games anymore? I'm not competing well. Some people are like that. Some people are not. Some people will see that and go, I need to improve my rankings. I will double down. And that's great because you're doubling down, hopefully, on the content. But I think it can be a separator as well. Those who aren't good at games, if that's what you make the whole learning module about, they may be disengaged. And I remember my wife talking to me over and over when she was a classroom teacher about everything's going over really well, but I've got these two kids and I'm really having a struggle with them. And she spent more time on trying to bring those two kids up into the middle of the pack than she did on anything else for months at a time. And in these online Zoomification kinds of things, how do you identify them? And once you identify them, how do you bring them up? So it's got to be a two-way street. You've got to get in there and see the reality of how the learners are all doing and know that you're being effective. Next question.
Kenneth Jones, Seattle, Washington. Given that we've often learned by example, what's your best example of training you've experienced, and why do you say so? Courtney, you want to take a shot at this?
I wouldn't say training, but education. I'll say this because Alex isn't here to say it, is connections. James Burke is a good example. He's doing history, basically, and he's teaching you history, but he's teaching the interactions and the connections, which most people would not even think had anything to do with that particular line of history. And so it makes it very interesting, and he made it very interesting by traveling to and recreating each of those situations in historical time that he's talking about. If he's talking about, ancient Egyptian ships, he'll be standing on an ancient Egyptian ship in Egypt. And so you get, it reinforces with visuals, putting that particular instructor in each of those individual environments. Makes it much more interesting, and it makes it much more retainable as far as information goes.
John Preto?
A couple interesting observations. So I thought our Raspberry Pi training was amazing, specifically how patient Jonas was from, all the way from Tony Mobley to the more advanced guys. Jonas walked through with everybody. I don't know how long we were on there, 2 hours or something. And he made certain that everybody was able to get through the entire platform, number one. Number two, the Dante training is really neat because they have a lab where you get a virtual version of their software and you have to step through it when it asks you the specific questions. I thought that was really cool. And the final thing is, when I took my exams for C&E for Novell, they had this system where if you got like the first 9 questions right, you finished the test. And they had some heuristic built in that said if this guy got all 9 questions right, he's done and he passed the class. Thought that was interesting.
Well, that's interesting. And they must have structured something so that they knew from those 9 questions that you knew enough about all the modules of the program that beyond that, you knew your stuff. You'd been there. You'd seen those aspects of the program. It's kind of interesting to me. Let's go on to the next question.
Down to the last question here. Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA. What should be the considerations for content the creator will be presenting versus self-directed courses?
And nobody's weighed in on this one. So, John Snyder will help us out here.
Sorry, I thought I had raised my hand. One of the biggest and most important thing that people who are entering the learning and development field miss is part of the role of the instructor is to be the navigator. And when you're in a classroom, I think people intuit that as the person in front here, I'm supposed to be getting people where they need to go. So I'm directing them, I'm pointing them, I'm, pushing them within boundaries. When you get to building asynchronous content like videos or e-learning modules especially, you shouldn't just assume that your learner knows how to navigate it. So it's really helpful to have a thorough table of contents, specific boundaries and guidelines, and make sure the buttons you have incorporated and the advancing slides, that sort of thing, is clear and explicit and even outlined, especially using things like alternative tags for images for accessibility. Because if your content is not something that someone can get through, they're not going to learn anything. They're going to be so frustrated that their brain basically will trigger the fight or flight response if it gets too bad, and they won't be able to retain anything anyways. So you want it to be clear and specific on how you get through the path through direct and indirect means to make sure people can navigate the content itself.
That makes perfect sense. We're down to the last question. I have one. Another one popped in, but let me just do the last 2 slides, because the last thing I asked my wife when I was talking to her about what points were important, I said, so what is the most important thing that people who are going to be engaged in creating some kind of training and content, and they don't have a lot of experience with it? And the last thing she said was this: training preparation takes lots of work, but, and this is the word that she lives by, preparation is everything. If you're going to start if you're going to attempt to help others learn to do something, you really do have to put in the work. If you just think that you can stand up and do it extemporaneously, you're probably not going to do it very well, because, again, you're getting a lot of people to give you their time and their attention. And if you don't have something to say to them that makes them stay engaged with it, and, I've done a lot of different kinds of training over the course of the time. I remember specifically the safety training that I did. I mentioned really quickly, like forklift operation, and there were a whole bunch of other things where if somebody doesn't get trained correctly, they can really hurt themselves or hurt others. So it's pretty mission critical because you want to stop that whenever you can. And for a variety of reasons. You don't want to hurt other people, period. But also in a corporate setting, when people get hurt, that leads to huge lawsuits and huge losses and things like that. So to be ineffective in doing the job of training people for things that are very important, you really do have to study what you're doing and try to put the time and effort in to do it as well as you possibly can. Now let's go to what is now the last question here. But if you have more, toss them in. If not, we'll just finish up here. We're within 10 minutes at the top of the hour. Next question.
Josh is back. Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA. And Josh asked, what methods popular in the past are obsolete in modern training?
John Snyder.
When I was in college in the early 2000s, I spent a good portion of that college career in education classes talking about the importance of using learning styles. Some people are oral or visual or kinetic learners. Turns out no one did any research to see if that helped people remember anything. It's just how people feel about the content. And the number one, I think, biggest myth that still perpetuates most training or many training organizations is the idea that people learn more or less effectively because of learning styles. There's a great, my favorite follow, I think, on Twitter is a man named Clark Quinn, and he has a book called Millennials and Goldfish and Other Myths or something like that. I'll find it and put it in the chat. But another common myth is that people have the attention span of goldfish, and that's also not true. But there's a whole bunch of them, and it's because learning industry is a very profitable industry, so people try to market new content and new methods, and they don't bother to go through the effort of validating or using research-based practices to make sure that training content is effective.
John Prado.
I went to a presentation where this guy had built a training system and ran it very successfully over the last 15 years, and then was watching the statistics of his site. 60% of his traffic was coming from mobile. And so he rewrote everything as mobile first, and then he condensed his content down to bite-sized pieces from 2 to 4 minutes. I thought that was interesting.
Absolutely. Courtney, you had some thoughts here?
Yeah, there's a training device that is now obsolete, which Apple has tried to patent. It's a rounded corner slate. And it was used in Victorian times, and they tried to patent a rounded corner learning device, and I pointed out this prior use from the 1800s. So, there's an example of a learning method that has been outdated, but has been incorporated into modern day use.
I still use whiteboards in my classroom sometimes, so it's not totally outdated.
I was going to go with film strips. I haven't seen this film strip in a long time, but there were all sorts of learning technologies that have come and gone. I will say the landscape has changed a good little bit. So much technology now. The eyeballs have migrated. The fact that most people on the planet really have personal digital devices of some kind. I mean, I think the penetration of those things is huge, and it's changing lots of things. One of them is the delivery of training content and the way it looks, the way it feels, the way people interact with it, the way people opt in to watching things like TikTok and Instagram and all these small segmented things. And a lot of that, if you kind of peel the top layer off, is really kind of training content. Maybe it's, just somebody jumping off something with a parachute on their back, but to a certain degree, bright people can look at that and go, oh, that's how that works. And oh, that's how it's not necessarily created to be direct training things, but to, that overview of, oh, look, he's casting a pot and he's not really training me to cast my own pots, but he's showing me all the steps. And once I'm aware of that, I become, I think, easier when I want to go learn about it. I have that overall idea. And there's just the whole digital world is full of that kind of stuff now. It's pretty amazing. Let's see. I have to put that up there because I wanted to talk about where we're going to, because I think we've taken care of all our questions today. Thank you all for everybody's input on what the questions are. We'll end a little bit early today, and that's fine. I have some thoughts about what's happening for the rest of the week. Today is Thursday. I believe Elle is doing Isadora at 9:00 right at the end of this. Hopefully so, because I know people have really been enjoying that. An incredible opportunity to learn Isadora. Birding with Lois comes up at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Tomorrow on Friday, I had finished all the lessons on the Final Cut thing, but I think I'm going to try to stop by at the same time, just in case anybody has questions. I said optionally I might do some of the areas that we haven't covered, kind of a catch-all. The other thing that I want to do is if anybody who's been in the training at any stage or wants to drop by and just ask questions, I'll probably open up at the same time at noon tomorrow and just be there for anybody who wants to talk about those kind of things. Let's see, the Zoom ISO Lab is coming up. Andy Carluccio will be there, I believe, at 2200 Zulu, 1500 Pacific time, for those of you for the Zoom ISO Lab. So pay attention to that. And I guess that takes care of all the things we have to do. Thank you all for coming today. Appreciate your dropping by. We'll end a little bit early today and head off. So if you're ready with the credits, let's roll them. I see nothing.
I think they were ready with the credits.
Yes, it's a big black screen. I tried to give them as much warning as possible. Maybe there will be.
In 6 minutes, we'll see.
Distracted by
6 minutes. Too bad we don't have the group we had yesterday where we did that whole crazy ASMR thing. That was fun.
Beans for lunch there, Mitch.
$85,000 miles on a Deluxe traversal today. I forgot to mention that the thing people hate most in the world is getting called into training. In the corporate world, we're doing training on Tuesday.
In call centers, people love it because then they don't have to be on the phone.
Oh, that's true.